Yo, what's happening, YouTube? Afro Cuban here, and I'm back with another special video. Now, before we get started, I wanted to let you guys know that I will be changing the title of my videos so that it's less confusing and less convenient when it comes to searching or finding my videos on YouTube. Yeah, I gotta play the algorithm game. And so, with that being said, it will no longer be what my DC movie universe would be like. Instead, I'll just keep it simple and call it Building My Cinematic Universe. Now, let me go into a little more detail on how my videos work and how I came up with this premise. I'll try my best to break it down so that I won't have to explain it in every video. Okay, so for those who are still in the dark on what exactly it is that I do, basically this is like a what if scenario. What if I was the one in charge of building a cinematic universe from scratch? How would I go about it? What movies would I put out and what storylines would I tell that would connect my characters in a way that brings my universe to life? So I came up with this idea because of my love for storytelling and character development, and my love for DC Comics. I didn't want to be like other YouTubers where I would just make an hour-long video and just go down a list of movies that I will put out. No, I wanted to go into more details. I want you guys to know what my characters are thinking, what they're feeling, and I wanted to take you on this ride of twists and turns. So that's why in my videos, I go into more in-depth detail on what my characters are doing and what they're going through. So when something happens, or if I decide to introduce a surprise character in future videos, I want you guys to be like, oh yeah, I remember when he hinted at that in a previous video. So this is why my format is a bit different from other YouTubers. I don't just make videos where I go down a list like, okay, my first movie would be Superman, my second movie would be Batman, my third movie is The Flash, my fourth movie would be Justice League. Okay, bye, and then just end the video. No, each video will be its own movie, and I will try my best to bring you into the world with my 3-act storytelling. And as I put out more videos, hopefully the more invested you guys will become and the more you will want to learn about what's happening and what's going on in my universe. But okay, that's enough rambling for now. So without further ado, let's get the video started. Okay, so we are now deep into the first phase. So this is where the spectacle of my movies will start to ramp up. And timeline wise, right now we are about 3 or 4 years into my universe, and we're on the 5th movie of phase 1. This is also going to be my very first sequel to be released in my universe, my second Batman movie, and this one will be called Batman Arkham Asylum. Now, I'm pretty sure we've all played the classic Arkham Asylum game, and this movie will basically be my way of paying homage to that game. 90% of the movie will take place inside of Arkham, and I will also use this opportunity to introduce more of Batman's rogues gallery. Okay, so Act 1. Now, when the movie first starts, we begin with seeing Dick Grayson and his parents performing at a local carnival. Now, the Graysons are high flying stunt performers who perform impossible stunts in the air. And one day, while they're taking a quick break, Dick sees his dad arguing with some shady looking goons behind the bleachers. The goons rough his dad up and then walk away, and that's when Dick runs over and asks his dad if he's okay. His dad says everything is fine, and they return to finish their performance. But right before they start performing, Dick sees the same goons that were just arguing with his dad sitting in the crowd, and they're sitting with a creepy looking man with a bunch of scars on his head. So immediately, Dick gets a feeling that something isn't right. And that's when he sees the creepy looking man stand up and walk away. Moments later, while Dick and his family are performing their stunts, the rope and the net that are meant to protect them all snap and break, and the Graysons all fall to their deaths, except for Dick, who gets saved at the last second by Jim Gordon. Now, Jim just so happened to be at the carnival with his daughter on his day off, and he swoops in at the last second and catches Dick. Jim then chases the creepy man after he sees him standing by the cut rope with a knife in his hand. Jim tackles the man and arrests him. We then find out that this creepy man is in fact Victor Zsasz. So now we transition to a couple months later, and Dick is in an orphanage managed by Wayne Industries. Now, Dick bounces around from different facilities because he keeps getting into fights with the other foster kids. And then one day, Dick sees on the news that Zaz beat his trial case and will be sent to Arkham Asylum instead of prison. So this enrages Dick, and he runs away so that he can find a way to get his revenge on Zaz. So now we transition to Arkham, and we see that all of the inmates are somehow freed from their cells and they run loose and take over the asylum. Some of them even take the doctors and nurses hostage. And this is where Batman finally makes his appearance. So, Batman is currently patrolling Gotham and he's in the middle of beating up and interrogating a local mugger. And then that's when he gets a call from Alfred. Alfred informs him of the situation at Arkham and tells him that the inmates have seemingly killed the warden and taken hostages. So Batman immediately calls his Batjet and he jumps in and flies away towards Arkham to try and restore order and save the hostages. Okay, so now we get into Act 2. So, Batman finally arrives at the asylum, and as his jet hovers above in the clouds, he sees that the police and SWAT team all have the asylum surrounded. But they can't breach it because they've gotten word that the inmates have planted explosives around the perimeter of the building. So before Batman goes in, first he puts on some armored padding because he knows that once he goes into the asylum, he'll be facing some of Gotham's most deranged and superpowered criminals. So he puts on the extra armor for better protection, and then Batman drops down and enters from the roof. Now, once Batman gets inside, he learns that both Two-Face and Bane have taken over the main wings of the building. Two-Face rounded up some goons and took over the East Wing, and Bane found his Venom serum and has been rampaging through the West Wing. So, first Batman goes after Two-Face. He infiltrates the East Wing and he sees that Two-Face and his crew have rounded up hostages and Two-Face is holding court, flipping a coin to decide their judgment. And that's when Batman swoops down and takes out all of the gang members, and then he knocks Two-Face unconscious and ties him up. Then he sets the hostages free and tells them to find a safe corridor to hide in. Batman then makes his way to the West Wing where he comes face to face with Bane. Now, Bane is a formidable opponent, so their fight goes on for a while. Bane tackles Batman through a wall, and then he picks up a table and throws it at Batman. But Batman uses his agility to flip over it, and then eventually Batman is able to sever the tube that pumps venom into Bane's blood. Bane starts to get weak, and Batman knocks him out as well and ties him up. So now that the two main threats are taken care of, Batman continues to make his way through the asylum, rescuing any hostages he can find and taking down any loose inmates he comes across. And that's when we get into Act 3. Okay, so now we finally transition back to Dick. Now, Dick is wearing a ski mask and he also finds a way to sneak into the asylum, but he's there to get revenge on Zaz. So, after some time goes by while sneaking around the building, Dick finally finds Zaz. Zaz is in one of the offices attempting to torture one of the nurses, and Dick intervenes and stops him. Now, Zaz has a knife and he tries to attack Dick, but Dick is way too fast and agile and easily disarms Zaz and takes him down. Dick then removes his mask so that Zaz can remember him. Dick's eyes are filled with rage and tears as he then yells, "Why? Why did you murder my family?" Zaz then smiles and says, "It wasn't personal. I was hired by Tony Zuko, the man your father owed money to. But don't worry, they didn't die for nothing. Look." And then Zaz leans forward to show Dick two fresh scars on the back of his head. And then he says, "See, your mommy and daddy are in a special place." Dick then picks up the knife and puts it to Zaz's throat. Dick then says, "This will be your last scar. My special place." But then, right at that moment, a batarang comes flying out of nowhere and knocks the knife out of Dick's hand. And then something snatches Zaz away and pulls him into the shadows. And then a few seconds later, Zaz gets tossed across the room unconscious. And then out from the shadows emerges Batman. But Dick is so enraged that he charges towards Batman and tries to fight him. And Dick actually gets in a few good hits. Using his speed and acrobatic ability, Dick flips off of the wall and lands a few kicks. But Batman is still too much for Dick to handle, and Batman eventually overpowers him. Batman then realizes that Dick is the young boy whose parents were killed at the carnival, and the same young boy who ran away from the foster home. So Batman tries to calmly talk to Dick and give him some words of inspiration and tells him that revenge isn't the answer. It will just cause him to spiral into a darker hole. Dick then starts to cry, and Batman consoles him. And then Batman even agrees to let Dick help him restore order back to the asylum. He tells Dick to focus only on saving the hostages and leave the inmates to him because they are dangerous. And then together they make their way through the asylum, rounding up the rest of the escaped inmates and saving any hostages they can. So, after some time goes by, the police and SWAT team finally decide to breach the building. They cut the power and barge into the main lobby, and the first person they see is Batman. Now, some of the cops don't trust Batman or think that he's dangerous, and the rest of them didn't even know that he exists or thought that he was a myth. So the officers panic and begin to open fire on Batman. And that's when Batman immediately lunges on Dick to protect him from the gunfire. And that's when Jim Gordon runs in and yells, "Hold your fire!" Now the smoke from all of the gunfire and the darkness makes it hard to see. And Batman uses this to his advantage and he disappears into the shadows with Dick. And they make their way to the next corridor. Dick then realizes that Batman is bleeding. Apparently, one of the bullets was able to penetrate his armor plating and struck him in the torso. But Batman ignores the pain and continues to limp forward. So, finally, they reach the warden's office and they see that the warden is actually alive. He's tied up with tape over his mouth, and on the other side of the room is a female doctor also tied up. Batman then realizes that there are bombs and C4 charges wired around the entire office. Batman then tells Dick to untie the doctor and he will untie the warden. But then, when Batman pulls the tape off of the warden's mouth, the warden then yells, "Wait, no, she's one of them!" And then the female doctor starts to giggle as she stands up and kicks Dick in the face, knocking him unconscious. And then we finally see that the actual mastermind behind this whole thing was actually the Joker. He spins around in the warden's chair, laughing hysterically, and he has the detonator in his hand. The Joker then looks at Batman and says, "Do you remember me? My feelings would be hurt if you didn't. I mean, after all, you are the one who created me." Batman then stares into Joker's eyes. And that's when he remembers that Joker was the random goon that he couldn't save that night when he fought with Black Mask. Batman then says, "Created you? I tried to save you." Joker then says, "Oh, you did save me. You saved me from a life of meaningless purgatory. You saved me from a life of dedication to someone else's well being. So allow me to repay that favor." Joker then looks at Dick's unconscious body laying next to the bomb, and then he cracks a devilish smile as he says, "Allow me to save you from that dedication." Batman sees that Joker is about to detonate the bomb, so he lunges on top of Dick to protect him from the explosion. But when Joker presses the detonator, nothing happens. No explosion. Instead, party confetti shoots out. Batman looks up and sees party confetti everywhere. And then he sees Joker and his female accomplice laughing as they run towards the warden's secret elevator behind his bookshelf. And they continue laughing as the elevator door closes. Batman then gets up and grabs the warden and says, "Where does that elevator lead to?" The warden then says that the elevator leads to a tunnel that will take them to an emergency exit at the far end of the building. Batman then says, "So he planned this whole thing? He waited for the police to come inside the building so that when he used the emergency exit, there will be no one outside to stop him. He's smarter than he looks." Dick then gets up and says, "So, what does that mean? Are we going after them?" Batman then says, "No, neither of us are in any condition to go after anyone. It means that their plan worked and they got away. For now." And right at that moment, the police and SWAT team breach the warden's office. They throw smoke grenades and barge in, and that's when Batman grabs Dick and uses the smoke to his advantage and sneaks out. And once the smoke clears, the police secure the warden, and with all of the hostages safe and the inmates locked back up, the asylum finally returns back to normal. And when the warden and the hostages all give their statements, they all say that Batman is the one who saved their lives. And when the warden is giving his statement, he also tells the police that the woman who helped the Joker was a psychiatrist by the name of Harleen Quinzel. She was assigned to treat the Joker, but ended up falling in love with him and helped him stage the whole thing so that they can escape together. We then transition back to Batman, and he's limping down an alley outside of the asylum, and Dick is still with him. Batman then presses a button on his belt, and then he looks at Dick and says, "Go home, kid." And then the Batjet hovers down from the clouds above them, and Dick then says, "I have no home." But that's when they hear a woman's voice coming from the shadows. She says, "Great job, hero. You let the deranged murderer escape." And as the woman walks out from the shadows, Batman then looks at her and says, "Amanda Waller, what are you doing here?" Amanda then tells Batman that she's putting together a team and she wants him to lead it. But obviously, Batman declines. Waller then says, "Think about my offer. I'll be in touch, Mr. Wayne." Now, Dick is flabbergasted as he says, "Mr. Wayne? As in Bruce Wayne?" But Batman doesn't say anything. He just stands there with that angry glare in his eyes. And then, as he grapples up into his jet with Dick, they fly away and the screen cuts to black. Now, before the movie ends, we get an epilogue scene. So a few weeks have gone by, and we see Jim Gordon standing on a rooftop smoking a cigar. And then he turns around and sees Batman standing on the ledge behind him. Gordon then jokingly says, "We're going to have to find a way to signal you. You can't just sneak up on an old man like that." And then Gordon says, I never got a chance to thank you for what you did at the asylum. You saved a lot of lives that night. Some of the guys still don't trust you, but as for the rest of us, you earned our respect." Now, I gotta say, you make my job a lot easier, but at the same time, you're making it harder. Ever since you showed up, we've been getting more weird and supernatural crimes happening around the city. Take the guy who escaped from Arkham, for example. He goes by the name Joker, and he's been leaving his calling card at all of his crime scenes. So now I've been promoted to police captain, and they gave me my own task force. And the commissioner has given me strict direct orders to bring you both in. But I actually think you're trying to help. Batman then says, "This is a war, Jim. A war for the soul of Gotham. Now, you won't always agree with the things that I have to do. I may even have to bring some of your colleagues to justice. But that's the price we pay. The price of justice. Things will get harder before they get easier. And sometimes things will become too much for you to handle. And if it ever comes to that, if there's ever a point where things get too out of control, too dangerous for you and your men, we've got it covered." Jim then puts out his cigar and then says, "We?" And when he looks up, Batman is gone. And then we get the ending scene of Batman diving from the rooftop and swinging on his grapple gun. And that's when we see Robin swinging down beside him. And then the screen fades to black one last time and the movie officially ends. And yeah, that would officially wrap up my Batman sequel, Batman Arkham Asylum. And yes, like I said earlier, this movie was my way of paying homage to the first Arkham game. So just like in the first game, I revealed at the end that Joker was the one behind everything. And with the help of Harley, he was able to set all of the inmates loose so that he and Harley can escape during all of the chaos. The bombs that he had stored around the building were also just another distraction. They weren't real. Because if you really think about it, where would Joker get a bunch of bombs from if he's inside of an asylum? They were handmade and filled with a bunch of party confetti to be used as a last resort distraction. Now, this movie also serves as a somewhat Robin origin story. I tried to find a way to integrate Robin's origin into the story without putting too much focus or screen time on Dick, because this is still a Batman movie at its core. But speaking of Robin, I want to let everyone know ahead of time that although I established that Robin does exist in my universe and he will have several brief cameos in the future, Robin will play a miniature part in Batman's story. In fact, Robin will barely be in my universe at all. Yes, I wanted to establish his existence, and yes, he's Batman's partner. But that doesn't mean every time we see Batman, we will also see Robin. No, I wanted to establish that he exists in my universe, but for the most part, moving forward, when we see Batman in future movies, he will still operate alone. But yeah, that's basically all I have for today's video. And if you guys have any issues with my story, or if you found any holes in my plot, or if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments. And as always, be well, be great, and I'll catch you nerds on the flip side.